The first shot hit the reinforced steel target at exactly 300 yards, not near the bullseye, dead center. Again, barked the alien instructor. His voice was harsh and metallic, like metal dragged across frozen stone. Derek Tallen adjusted the sling of his service rifle and reset his stance. He fired. Another shot rang out, another bullseye, at least by human standards. Off by 2 microns, the instructor said, without even glancing at the readout on the side of its wrist. The alien turned away and lifted its long, narrow rifle, a sleek black thing that looked more like a musical instrument than a weapon. It fired once, and the human target dummy positioned behind a blind corner 200 yards away dropped with a hole directly through the simulated brainstem. Derek lowered his rifle. "Your kind aims like it's trying to remember a dream," the alien said. Its name was Veln, and it ranked high among the sharpshooters of the Xalec Dominion. "You correct after the shot. We do not fire unless the correction is already made." Derek didn't answer. There wasn't much point. Every Earth soldier stationed on Grelik Base had heard the same thing since arrival. The Xalec were faster, more precise, and infinitely less impressed with human trigger fingers. They didn't hide their disdain. They wore it like a badge. Veln's yellow eye narrowed. "You may rest now, Derek Tallen. I will record your scores for the archive. It will be useful for future statistical analysis on underperforming biological systems." The insult was buried in bureaucratic wording, but it landed just the same. Derek slung his rifle and walked off the range. The base was a joint operation Earth's first real military exchange with the Xalec Dominion. The humans had come hoping to cooperate, to learn. But since day one, it had been clear the aliens viewed the partnership as more of a charity project, or worse, a joke. Veln and his cohort had a favorite pastime, setting up trick shots, executing them flawlessly, then inviting human soldiers to try the same. The games always ended in laughter. Not from the humans. Inside the makeshift barracks, Derek pulled off his helmet and sat on the edge of his cot. His bunkmate Ramirez was scrubbing carbon from his rifle's bolt assembly. "How many misses today?" "None," Derek said. "Yeah, then why do you look like somebody ate your dog?" "Because apparently I was off by 2 microns. Ramirez chuckled. "That's practically a compliment." "Last week Veln told me my aim was like a broken limb trying to paint." Derek didn't laugh. "I don't think it's just about showing off. They're testing something." Ramirez stopped scrubbing. "What do you mean?" "Every time we shoot, they log it. Record angles, body posture, everything." "I think they're trying to map our limits." "Well, they won't find much. We're not even allowed to use our own scopes." Derek nodded. That was another thing. The Xalec had insisted on standardization, which meant stripping human weapons of their preferred gear and replacing them with Dominion optics designed for eyes that could see ultraviolet bands. "You know what else?" Derek leaned forward. "I think they're planning a demonstration, something big." He wasn't wrong. 3 days later, every human and Xalec stationed at Grelik Base gathered at the central proving ground. The dome overhead was retracted, exposing the rocky landscape of the moon. Massive floodlights cut through the darkness and illuminated a sprawling live fire course. Veln stood before the group, flanked by 3 other Xalec sharpshooters. He raised his long rifle. "Today, we show the difference between instinct and mastery." He tapped a control on his wrist. A series of drones launched into the air, weaving between jagged rocks and simulated civilian targets. The Xalec fired in sequence. 4 shots, 4 drones spiraled out of the sky, each hit in mid-maneuver. The humans clapped out of obligation, then Veln turned. "You may try." Ramirez nudged Derek. "You want this one?" Derek shook his head. "Not with their optics." But someone stepped forward, a private named Cooper, young, eager. He took the offered rifle, waited for the drone release, and fired. He hit 1, missed the other 3. The Xalec didn't laugh, but their silence said more. Afterward, the humans retreated to their corner of the base. Derek found himself lingering near the observation deck, staring at the target fields. "You know what bothers me most?" He turned to see Commander Yates, the senior Earth officer on Grelik. "They mock our aim, but they never practice in bad conditions." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Wind, rain, fog, anything that doesn't involve perfect lighting and calibrated air." Derek looked back out over the terrain. The Xalec loved control. Every demonstration took place in still air under clear skies with range conditions dialed to their specs. Yates continued. Earth wasn't that kind to us. We learned to shoot when the world didn't want us to. That stuck in Derek's head. 2 weeks later, an atmospheric anomaly swept across the moon. Nobody expected it. A solar flare had interacted with the thin moon's crust and kicked up a dense, silicate fog. Visibility dropped to 20 feet. The Xalec were furious. This disrupts our optical alignment, Veln barked. We must reschedule all drills. But the humans didn't stop. In fact, they seemed to come alive. Yates ordered a live fire exercise through the fog. Derek led the team. The Dominion scoffed, choosing to observe from the high ridge. Are your soldiers attempting to navigate blind? Veln asked. No, Yates said. They're navigating like soldiers. Derek moved low to the ground, rifle raised, scanning outlines and listening for movement. The fog was thick but not silent. Every footstep echoed. Every shift of gravel gave away position. He raised the rifle, fired. A drone dropped from the fog. Another moved fast overhead. Ramirez called out coordinates. Derek adjusted, squeezed the trigger, and the drone veered, crashing into the rocks. The Xalec watched, stunned. How are they acquiring targets? One of them asked. Their optics aren't even functional in this density. Veln narrowed his eye. They are adapting. The next day, Veln approached Derek directly. You used audio triangulation. Partially, Derek said, still bandaging a scrape from the drill. Mostly instinct. Veln studied him. You were taught to fight in environments like this. No, we just didn't have a choice. That was the first time Veln didn't respond with sarcasm or derision. The fog lingered for several days. During that time, the humans mocked for weeks became the only ones capable of running effective drills. The Dominion soldiers stood down, frustrated by their own reliance on conditions now gone. Derek used the time well. He taught his team to move silently, to shoot by feel, to listen for the difference between stone and synthetic drone casing. By the end of the week, the humans had completed 3 successful night raids through the fog. The Xalec had completed none. Then came the final test. A Dominion officer had gone missing on patrol. His signal was weak, transmitting intermittently from somewhere in the rocky sector beyond the ridge. The storm made aerial retrieval impossible. The Xalec refused to send a team too dangerous without visibility. Yates turned to Derek. Can you do it? Derek nodded. Give me Ramirez and 2 hours. The team moved out, rifles ready, navigating by sound and thermal readings. Derek spotted the signal beacon wedged between 2 boulders. The officer, unconscious, had a fractured leg and a deep gash along his side. Probably fell, Ramirez said. Derek lifted the alien over his shoulder. Let's move before it gets worse. The extraction was slow. Derek's legs shook under the weight. He slipped twice, reopening a bruised rib. The fog was unrelenting. Back at base, medics rushed the officer into care. Veln stood outside the infirmary, motionless. You risked yourself for one of ours. That's what we do. Veln said nothing for a long time. Then, I should like to learn your methods in the fog. Derek looked at him, surprised. You want training? Veln nodded once. Adaptation is not weakness, it is survival. Weeks passed. The fog eventually cleared, but not before something fundamental had shifted. The Xalec no longer mocked. They trained with the humans now, side by side. The sharpshooting trials continued, but with new parameters. Wind, obstructions, variable light, and fog. Derek stood on the range, rifle slung, watching Veln fire into a target barely visible through synthetic mist. The shot rang out. A hit, off by an inch. Veln turned. Close enough. Derek smiled faintly. Just about. The silicate fog had lifted 3 days ago, but the fine dust still clung to the walls of Grelik Base like pollen after a storm. Derek rinsed his hands in the basin, scrubbing the grime from under his nails. The water came out pink. Not from blood, just the stubborn residue of the moon's surface, as if it resented being breathed on by humans. Infirmary lighting buzzed overhead, flickering once before stabilizing. The air was lukewarm and smelled faintly of antiseptic and melted insulation. Across the room, Lieutenant Oren, a Xalec with a fractured leg and deep dermal lacerations, lay motionless under a blanket of biosensors. His recovery was progressing well enough. It had taken Derek and his team nearly an hour to carry him back through unstable terrain, but the medics had stabilized him within minutes. What they couldn't explain was the bruised rib that hadn't come from the fall. Derek pulled on a clean shirt and sat on the edge of a supply crate. His shoulder still throbbed from hauling the alien back, and his fingers tingled from mild nerve compression. He hadn't reported it. He didn't want to sit out the next drill. "I reviewed your route," said a voice to his left. It was Veln, standing perfectly still, arms crossed behind his back. "You took a path with a 30-degree incline over unstable shale. That is not efficient." "I didn't have an efficiency problem," Derek said, wrapping his fingers around a hydration pouch. "I had a dying officer on my back. You could have waited for Dominion reinforcements." "I could have." "He'd be dead." Veln said nothing for several long seconds, his gaze flicking between Derek and the medical monitors. The silence was broken only by the slow rhythm of the alien's assisted breathing system. His species didn't do well with trauma-induced hypoxia. "You pushed your body past safety thresholds," Veln said finally. "Why? Because he was breathing. That is not sufficient rationale. It is for us." Veln's eye ridge tightened, a subtle gesture most Dominion officers used when confused rather than angry. "Explain." Derek stood, stretching his left arm. "We don't wait around to see how bad something gets. If we can stop it from getting worse, we move, even if it's messy, even if it hurts." Veln studied him for a moment longer before turning his gaze to Oren. "He will live." "That is statistically improbable. We calculated his odds at only 12%. Guess I got lucky." "You did not. You carried him from a ravine with a dislocated shoulder and internal bruising. That is not luck, that is." "Reckless, unreasonable." Derek leaned against the wall, grinning despite the ache in his spine. "Now you're getting it." Veln's head tilted slightly. "You find humor in your suffering." "No. I find it in yours." That drew a sound from Veln that Derek hadn't heard before, a sharp exhale, almost like a cough. He wasn't sure if it was amusement or an allergic reaction. A low chime sounded from the doorway. Major Xalec entered, another Xalec officer, taller than the others and draped in the formal armor of command. His gait was fluid, but his expression was strained. "Captain Tallen," Xalec said, glancing at Veln, "your presence is requested in the simulation wing." "There has been an incident." "What kind?" "The kind involving fire suppression foam and an unsanctioned kinetic test." Derek sighed and followed. The simulation wing sat 3 levels down. By the time they reached it, Derek could already smell the burnt polymer. 2 Dominion engineers were scraping melted fragments off the wall with magnetic blades. Ramirez stood near the back, helmet off, covered in white foam and grinning. "What did you do?" "Proved something." Derek looked at the shattered remains of the Dominion's modular training drone, now fused with the wall. "With a grenade." "With a slingshot." Derek blinked. "A what?" Ramirez held up the weapon, a crude Y-shaped tool made from a broken antenna and surgical tubing. The projectile had been a tungsten slug, now embedded in the synthetic wall plating. Xalec stepped forward, inspecting the damage. "You bypassed the projectile recognition system." "That is not permitted." "I didn't bypass anything," Ramirez said. "There's no sensor for projectiles under 30 grams. Your system only flags high-velocity munitions. I just operated outside the parameters." "That is dangerous. That's war." Xalec turned to Derek. "Is this behavior sanctioned?" "No," Derek said, "but it is impressive." The Dominion officers exchanged a glance. Ramirez picked foam out of his hair. "You keep designing tests to show us what we can't do," he said, "but you haven't tested what we will do." Veln stepped forward, arms still behind his back. "You believe your ingenuity compensates for inferior targeting." "No," Ramirez said. "We believe our ingenuity is our targeting." Xalec looked at the wall again. "That drone cost 8,000 Dominion credits. I can glue it," Ramirez offered. "No, you will demonstrate the method again without destruction." They reconvened an hour later. The engineering team had cleared the debris, and a new drone hovered in the center of the sim chamber. Derek stood to the side, arms crossed, while Xalec and Veln observed from behind the reinforced glass. Ramirez loaded the slingshot with a rubber pellet this time, stepped into position, and waited for the drone to move. It darted left. Ramirez fired. The pellet struck the underside of the drone's stabilizer, sending it into a slow spin. Xalec tapped a command into the control panel. That trajectory was not predicted. Because you don't plan for spontaneity, Derek said. That is inefficient. That's how we survive. Later that evening, Derek returned to the barracks. He sat on the lower bunk and peeled off his boots. The bruises on his shoulder had darkened to a deep purple, and his muscles ached from overuse. He had half a mind to request a muscle relaxant, but he knew the infirmary was still overwhelmed from a minor reactor leak the day before. He lay back, staring at the dull ceiling. There was a knock, 2 sharp taps at the frame. Veln entered, holding a small rectangular case. I reviewed your medical chart. Derek sat up. That's a violation of privacy, not among allies. That's not how privacy works. Veln ignored him and opened the case. Inside were 4 flexible adhesive strips and a small vial containing a thick, amber fluid. This is a Dominion neuromuscular salve, non-narcotic. It will reduce inflammation and accelerate recovery by 37%. Derek hesitated. No side effects, none that are fatal. Well, that's comforting. Veln knelt and applied the strips with inhuman precision. The salve burned at first, then numbed. Derek flexed his fingers. The tingling eased. Thanks, he said. You should not have been able to carry Orin. Your frame is not optimized for that task. We're not optimized for much. Veln sealed the case. That is not accurate. You are optimized for unpredictability. That's not something you can design for. No, it must be endured. They sat in silence for a moment. The barracks were quiet, save for the occasional hum of the air filtration system. Veln stood. Tomorrow you will demonstrate fog drills for our cadets. Thought you didn't like those. They are inefficient, but necessary. Derek nodded. You're learning. Veln paused at the door. I do not enjoy being wrong. Well, Derek said, leaning back on his bunk, get used to it. Derek's boots sank half an inch into the mud as he stepped onto the proving field, which had been flooded intentionally that morning by the Dominion's environmental engineers. Shallow pools reflected the overcast sky, and the wind carried grit that clung to the corners of his eyes. Dominion cadets, 18 of them, stood in staggered rows ahead, tall and skeletal in their matte gray armor, rifles held with ceremonial stiffness. Veln stood off to the side of the field, arms folded and expression unreadable. Derek adjusted the strap of the worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder and stepped in front of the cadets. You've all been briefed. Today we're running live fog drills, low visibility, variable wind, and non-standard terrain. Targets will be moving. You'll miss more than you hit. None of the cadets responded. Their posture didn't shift, eyes forward. Derek dropped the bag at his feet and unzipped it. Inside were 3 rifles, battered and mismatched. He pulled one out and held it up. This isn't a Dominion coil rifle. It's a human marksman rifle. Manual chamber, bolt action. If it jams, it doesn't reset. You fix it. If the scope fogs, you wipe it. If the bolt freezes, you slap it. You'll be using these. A ripple passed through the cadets, barely perceptible, but there. An instinctive recoil from the idea of handling something so primitive. Derek loaded a round into the chamber, flicked the safety off, and sighted downrange. He aimed at a small target just above the ridgeline, barely visible through the haze. The wind tugged at his jacket as he adjusted for drift. He exhaled slowly and fired. The target wobbled, a gentle metallic clang confirming the hit. Not center mass, but enough to drop a drone. He set the rifle back down and turned to the group. We're not testing marksmanship today. We're testing what you do when your optics are useless, when your rangefinder's lying to you, and when your hands are too cold to reload by instinct. Dominion protocol says you wait until conditions improve. Human protocol says you get it done anyway. One cadet in the second row raised a long arm, talons glinting under the clouds. What if the rifle malfunctions mid-sequence? Fix it. And if the target moves too fast to track visually, predict it. You are asking us to guess, I'm asking you to feel it. There's a difference. The cadet lowered his arm. Derek moved down the line, handing out rifles as he went. The Dominion soldiers took them gingerly, as if they might splinter at a touch. One of them crinkled his nose slit after sniffing the oiled stock. "Smells like wood." "It is wood," Derek said. "You'll live." The drills began with 2-minute runs through the obstacle field. Fog generators pumped out a dense gray mist that clung to every surface. Derek followed the first group in, crouching near the east barricade, watching silent silhouettes move between cover. Each Dominion cadet took 3 shots. Some hit. Most didn't. When they regrouped, he didn't criticize. He just handed them cleaning cloths and told them to reset. By the 3rd round, the questions started coming faster. How far should we lead if we hear movement, but cannot confirm trajectory? If the sound's steady, lead by a quarter meter. If it stutters, wait. What if the target's behind cover? Then you wait for a mistake. They always make one. Wouldn't that violate engagement protocol? Not if you're the one writing the protocol. Veln approached slowly, stopping just behind Derek. The fog curled around his legs. "They are not used to failure," he said. "They'll get used to it. They are used to precision. This feels like chaos." "No," Derek said, eyes still on the field. "It feels like Earth." More drills followed. By the 5th run, 2 cadets had jammed their bolts. One dropped a magazine in the mud, and one caught her hand on a jagged metal edge and had to leave to get it dressed. But something shifted after the 6th. The intervals between shots grew shorter. One cadet clipped a target mid-dive. Another adjusted his stance without prompting and hit a drone through thermal shimmer. Derek leaned against the barrier and sipped water from his pouch. His shoulder still twinged when he moved too fast, but he ignored it. "You're not yelling at them," Veln said. "They don't need yelling. They need reps. In the Dominion, failure is corrected through analysis." "Sometimes," Derek said, "it's corrected through bruises." They sat together in the mess hall later, a rare quiet between drills. The Dominion cadets ate at a separate table, their rations lined up like specimens. Derek nursed a bowl of lukewarm stew, dipping bread into it absently. Veln didn't eat. He rarely did in public. "You haven't asked why I volunteered for this," Derek said. "I assumed it was punishment. Not this time. I asked for it." Veln's head tilted slightly. "Why? Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated." "They do not underestimate you now. They will again. That's how things work. You prove one thing, they forget the next week. You fall behind, they call you slow. You win, they say it was luck, so you keep showing up. Over and over. Until it's not luck anymore." Veln didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. 2 days later, the final assessment began. The proving field had been rearranged. New obstacles. Randomized target movement. The fog was denser than ever, and the Dominion engineers had added low-frequency noise generators to simulate battlefield confusion. Each cadet had 1 run. Real-time feedback. No corrections. Derek stood near the command post, watching the live feed through thermal imaging. The first cadet moved with exaggerated caution, pausing too often, missing 3 of 5 shots. The second fared better, smoother transitions, 2 hits. By the 5th cadet, Derek saw something he hadn't expected. They were improvising. One used a broken fence post to stabilize his rifle. Another fired blind through a tarp after listening for footsteps. One even switched to kneeling mid-run to lower his profile through the mist. None of these tactics had been taught by Dominion protocol. Veln stood beside him, arms clasped. "They have not operated like this before. They've never had to. They are not moving like soldiers. They are moving like humans." Veln didn't answer, but Derek caught the twitch in his mouth plates, not quite a grin, something else, a quiet permission. Later that evening, Derek sat alone in the barracks, wrapping a gauze bandage around the side of his left hand. He'd caught it during a demo run on a jagged bracket, nothing deep, but enough to sting when the antiseptic hit. He winced and muttered under his breath, a knock at the frame. Ramirez entered, holding a data pad. "You watching the reviews?" "Not yet." "They're calling it tactical irregularity with positive outcome. That's Dominion for we don't get it, but it worked." Derek chuckled once, then winced again as he tightened the bandage. "You gonna get that stitched?" "No need. Shallow. Pressure stopped it." "You ever get tired of fixing yourself up in here, only when it's not worth it?" Ramirez set the pad down. "Well, today was worth it." Derek looked up. "Yeah." It was. 2 hours later, Veln stood in the training archive reviewing footage from the final runs. He paused on a frame showing a cadet firing from a crouch, rain sheeting off his armor, target dropping mid-spin. He rewound it. Watched again. The Dominion had always believed in precision. In certainty. In repeatable outcomes, but what he had seen, what Derek had taught, was not precision. It was adaptation. It was failure, followed by correction, followed by action. It was motion without guarantee. He exhaled slowly and closed the file. Outside, the last of the fog was lifting.